Bright green light flashed across the scanner, signaling a valid first-class ticket. Yet, the gate agent violently slammed her hand down, blocking the path. Sneering at the black man in a faded sweatshirt standing before her, she decided he simply didn't belong in her premium cabin. Smugly reaching for her radio, she called airport police to remove a hostile passenger, enjoying a ruthless flex of her petty authority. Seconds later, her triumphant smile vanished. The man calmly handed security a heavy, engraved black card, and her blood ran ice-cold. She hadn't just profiled a traveler, she had just called the cops on the undercover CEO of the entire airline. The air inside Concourse at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport was thick with the distinct, exhausting atmosphere of international travel. It was 6:45 p.m. on a Friday, and the terminal was a chaotic symphony of rolling luggage wheels clicking over the terrazzo floors, the muffled hum of overlapping conversations, and the sharp, robotic announcements echoing from the overhead PA system. Outside the massive, floor-to-ceiling windows, a relentless Georgia thunderstorm was brewing, casting a dark, bruised purple hue over the tarmac. At Gate B12, the situation was particularly tense. Meridian Airways Flight 402, a direct red-eye to London Heathrow, was already delayed by 45 minutes due to the incoming weather system. The passengers gathered around the boarding area were restless, tired, and thoroughly out of patience. Standing behind the elevated podium, bathed in the harsh, fluorescent light of the departure desk, was Brenda Lawson. Brenda was a 15-year veteran of Meridian Airways, a gate agent who had long ago traded whatever passion she initially had for customer service for a bitter, unyielding sense of petty authority. In Brenda's world, the area behind the podium was her kingdom, and she ruled it with an iron fist and a rigid adherence to her own personal interpretations of company policy. Over the years, she had developed a sharp eye for what she considered the right kind of passenger, those who fit her narrow, prejudiced worldview of who deserved to fly in the luxury cabins, and who was merely scraping by in economy. Today, the delays had pushed Brenda's already notoriously short temper to its absolute limit. She aggressively tapped her manicured nails against the hard plastic of her keyboard, glaring out at the sea of passengers crowding the boarding lanes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brenda's voice crackled through the gate microphone, dripping with condescension. "I need everyone to step back from the boarding lanes. We have not begun the boarding process. Crowding the podium will not make the plane leave any faster. We will begin with our Diamond Medallion members and first-class passengers in Group 1. If you are not Group 1, do not approach the desk." Among the crowd was Onyx Echo. Onyx did not look like the typical international first-class passenger, at least not according to Brenda's heavily biased standards. He was a tall, broad-shouldered black man in his late 40s, dressed for comfort on an 8-hour transatlantic flight. He wore a faded navy blue Yale University sweatshirt, high-end but unassuming dark grey joggers, and a pair of pristine white sneakers. A well-worn leather weekend duffel bag was slung casually over his right shoulder. There were no flashy designer logos, no expensive watch gleaming on his wrist, no tailored suit to signal his immense net worth. Onyx was, by all outward appearances, just a man exhausted by travel, eager to get to his seat, have a quiet dinner, and sleep over the Atlantic. He stood patiently in the dedicated Group 1 lane, scrolling through emails on his phone, completely oblivious to the piercing, judgmental glare zeroing in on him from the podium. Brenda narrowed her eyes, observing him from behind her monitor. Her bias, deeply ingrained and entirely unchecked, flared immediately. "Look at him," she thought, her internal monologue dripping with contempt, standing right in the middle of the priority lane. He probably thinks he can sneak on early with Group 4. She had seen it 100 times before, or at least she convinced herself she had. People trying to game the system, people who didn't belong in the priority queues, trying to push their way past the respectable passengers. Finally, the flight deck cleared the cabin for boarding. "We are now inviting our first class and Group 1 passengers to board," Brenda announced, her eyes never leaving Onyx. Onyx slipped his phone into his pocket, adjusted his duffel bag, and took 3 confident steps forward, presenting his digital boarding pass on the illuminated screen of his smartphone. "Excuse me, sir," Brenda snapped, stepping out from behind the monitor to physically block his path to the jet bridge scanner. Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass, loud enough that the businessman directly behind Onyx, a nervous-looking man named Thomas Weaver, flinched. Onyx stopped, offering a polite but confused smile. "Good evening. Group 1, right? This lane is for first class and Diamond Medallion members only," Brenda said, emphasizing the premium tiers as if explaining a complex concept to a child. "Economy boarding will be called later. You need to step aside and clear the lane." Onyx's polite smile remained, though the warmth in his eyes slightly dimmed. He had dealt with this specific brand of prejudiced assumption more times than he cared to count throughout his life, though usually it didn't happen in airports anymore. "I understand," he replied, his voice calm, deep and steady. "I am in first class, seat 2A. He held his phone out toward the optical scanner. Brenda's jaw tightened. Instead of letting him scan the device, she slammed her hand down directly over the glass surface of the scanner, physically preventing him from checking in. "I need to see your ticket, sir." "Your actual ticket," she demanded, her tone shifting from patronizing to openly hostile. "The digital boarding pass is right here," Onyx said, keeping his voice remarkably even. He angled the phone so she could clearly see the screen. The bold letters, Group 1 and First Class, were unmistakable against the bright white background of the app. Brenda looked at the screen, her eyes darting over the digital text. A flicker of hesitation crossed her face, but her pride and stubborn bigotry refused to let her back down. She was already committed. In her mind, there was no way a man dressed in sweatpants, looking like Onyx did, had legitimately paid $6,000 for a transatlantic first-class suite. "Anyone can take a screenshot of a ticket," Brenda countered, crossing her arms over her chest. "System glitch. Upgrades, processing errors. It happens all the time. I'm going to need to see some physical identification and the credit card you use to purchase this fare." The atmosphere around Gate B12 instantly changed. The low murmur of the waiting crowd evaporated into a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Dozens of eyes turned toward the podium. Thomas Weaver, standing right behind Onyx, nervously shifted his weight, looking down at his own digital pass, which he knew Brenda would never question. Onyx took a slow, deep breath. The casual traveler facade was beginning to crack, revealing the steel beneath. "You want to see the credit card I used to purchase the ticket?" Onyx asked, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a quiet authority that would have made a more perceptive person pause. "Is that a new Meridian Airways policy for Group 1 boarding? Because I fly quite often, and I've never been asked to present my purchasing credit card at the gate." "It's a security measure," Brenda lied effortlessly, her chin jutting out in defiance. "To prevent credit card fraud, which is highly prevalent with last-minute high-fare bookings. Now, are you going to comply, or am I going to have to ask you to step out of the line permanently?" The tension in Concourse E was now palpable, thick enough to choke on. The rain lashed violently against the terminal windows, a fitting backdrop for the storm brewing at the podium. Onyx stood his ground. He did not raise his voice. He did not make sudden movements. He understood the precarious, dangerous tightrope he was forced to walk. As a black man in America, he knew that showing even a fraction of the anger he was currently feeling could be instantly weaponized against him. Brenda wanted a reaction. She wanted him to raise his voice so she could justify her prejudice. He refused to give her the satisfaction. "I am happy to show you my identification," Onyx said calmly, reaching slowly into his back pocket and pulling out a sleek, minimalist leather wallet. He extracted his Georgia driver's license and placed it face up on the counter, well away from her hands. Onyx Echo. As you can see, the name matches the boarding pass perfectly. Brenda leaned in, scrutinizing the license as if searching for a hidden forgery watermark. She picked it up, held it to the light, and then looked back at Onyx, her expression souring even further. The ID was flawless. The name matched. But Brenda was in too deep. Her ego, fragile and toxic, could not handle being proven wrong in front of an audience of 70 waiting passengers. "This just proves who you are," Brenda said, tossing the ID back onto the counter with a dismissive clack. "It doesn't prove how you obtained a first-class international ticket. Like I said, I need the purchasing credit card. If you cannot produce it, I am going to have to deny you boarding and cancel the ticket due to suspected fraud." A gasp rippled through the crowd. "Excuse me." An older white woman named Clara Higgins, standing a few feet away in the Group 2 line, spoke up. Her voice was trembling, but indignant. "That is absolutely ridiculous. You just checked his ID. Let the man onto the plane. We are all tired." Brenda shot Clara a venomous glare. "Ma'am, this does not concern you. This is an official airline security matter. Do not interfere." Onyx looked at Brenda, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that finally made her falter for a fraction of a second. "Miss Lawson," he said, reading her name tag, "I highly recommend you let me scan my boarding pass. You are holding up an already delayed flight based on a non-existent policy. I assure you, my ticket is valid." To Brenda, this calm, authoritative tone was the ultimate insult. How dare this man speak to her like he was in charge? How dare he challenge her authority at her gate? "That's it," Brenda snapped, her voice trembling with manufactured rage. She snatched her two-way radio from the clip on her belt. She pressed the side button, her eyes locked triumphantly on Onyx. "Dispatch, this is Gate B12. I need airport security and police presence immediately. I have a hostile, non-compliant passenger attempting to breach the boarding area with suspected fraudulent documents. He is refusing to step aside and is causing a major disturbance." The crowd erupted in a low roar of disbelief. "He wasn't doing anything," Clara Higgins yelled, stepping forward, only to be held back gently by her husband. "You're targeting him." "He's perfectly calm," Thomas Weaver added, finally finding his courage. "You're the one causing a disturbance." "Everyone step back," Brenda shouted into the microphone, her voice echoing shrilly through the terminal. "If anyone else interferes with an airline official, you will all be denied boarding. Security is on the way." Onyx didn't move a muscle. He simply stood there, looking at Brenda with an expression that had shifted from mild annoyance to profound, chilling disappointment. He slowly picked up his driver's license and slid it back into his wallet. "You've made a very serious mistake, Brenda," Onyx said quietly, so quietly that only she could hear it over the noise of the murmuring crowd. "We'll see about that when you're in handcuffs," she sneered back, her heart pounding with a twisted sense of adrenaline. She had won. She was going to see him escorted out in front of everyone, proving once and for all that her instincts were right. 2 minutes later, the heavy sound of boots hitting the terrazzo floor echoed down the concourse. 2 officers from the Atlanta Police Department Airport Division, accompanied by a TSA supervisor, pushed their way through the crowd. The lead officer, a stern-faced man named Gregory Miller, approached the podium, his hand resting casually near his duty belt. "What's the situation here?" Officer Miller asked, looking between Brenda and Onyx. Brenda immediately transformed her demeanor. The aggressive tyrant vanished, replaced instantly by the terrified, overwhelmed victim. She clutched her hands to her chest, her voice shaking with fake distress. "Officer, thank goodness," Brenda gasped. "This man. He became incredibly aggressive when I asked him for standard verification of his first-class ticket. He started making demands, refusing to show me the proper documentation, and when I told him he couldn't board, he refused to leave the podium. I felt extremely threatened. He's trying to use a fraudulent ticket to get on the flight." Officer Miller turned to Onyx, assessing him. Onyx stood perfectly still, his hands resting easily on the strap of his duffel bag, showing no signs of the aggression Brenda had just vividly described. "Sir," Officer Miller said, his tone professional but firm, "I'm going to need you to step away from the podium and hand over your identification and your boarding pass." "Of course, officer," Onyx replied smoothly. "I'm happy to cooperate fully." Onyx reached into his pocket. Brenda watched with a triumphant smirk, waiting for the inevitable moment when the police would discover the fraud, arrest him, and vindicate her in front of the entire gate. But Onyx didn't just pull out his driver's license this time. Onyx opened his wallet and slowly extracted 3 items. He placed them deliberately on the flat surface of the podium, right in front of Officer Miller, but angled so Brenda had a perfect, unobstructed view. The first item was his Georgia driver's license. The second was his digital boarding pass on his phone. The third was a solid, heavy-gauge, matte black metal card. It caught the harsh light of the terminal, the engraved silver lettering gleaming sharply. Officer Miller looked down. He picked up the driver's license, verified the face, and then picked up the heavy black metal card. He frowned, his eyes scanning the text. Brenda craned her neck, her smirk firmly in place. "See? I told you. He probably doesn't even have the credit card. It's a fake." "Quiet, Mom," Officer Miller said sharply, cutting her off. The officer's entire demeanor had suddenly shifted. He looked from the metal card back to Onyx, his eyes widening in sudden realization. The stern, authoritative posture of the police officer melted away, replaced by an immediate, rigid professionalism bordering on deference. "Mr. Echo," Officer Miller said, clearing his throat, his voice now carrying a deep note of respect, "I apologize for the inconvenience." Brenda's smirk froze. She blinked, confused. "Mr. Echo? Apologize? What was happening?" Officer Miller turned toward Brenda, holding the black metal card up so she could read it clearly. "Miss Lawson, are you aware of who this man is?" He's a disruptive passenger," Brenda stammered, the first icy tendrils of panic beginning to claw at the edges of her mind. "He's committing fraud. This is not a credit card, Miss Lawson," Officer Miller said, his voice hard and flat. He placed the heavy card right under her nose. Brenda's eyes focused on the silver lettering, deeply engraved into the matte black metal. Onyx Echo Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of the Board Meridian Airways Global. The words hit Brenda like a physical blow to the chest. The air rushed out of her lungs. Her vision tunneled, the edges of the terminal blurring into a chaotic smudge of color. The ambient noise of the airport seemed to drop away entirely, leaving a ringing silence in her ears. Chief Executive Officer. It was impossible. The new CEO of Meridian Airways, the parent company that had just aggressively restructured their entire executive board 2 weeks ago, was a phantom figure to the ground staff. They had read emails about a new era of leadership, about a man from outside the traditional airline hierarchy brought in to fix the catastrophic customer service ratings the airline had been suffering from. but CEOs wore tailored Italian suits. They flew on private Gulf streams. They didn't stand in the commercial boarding lanes wearing faded Yale sweatpants and carrying beat-up duffel bags. Brenda stared at the card, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly like a fish out of water. The color drained from her face, leaving her a sickly, chalky white. I. Brenda choked out, her gaze slowly moving from the card up to Onyx's face. Onyx's expression hadn't changed. He still looked calm, but the mild disappointment had crystallized into something far more dangerous, a cold, clinical, executive judgment. I took over as CEO of this airline precisely 14 days ago, Onyx said, his voice echoing clearly in the sudden, dead silence of the gate area. My first directive was to initiate a comprehensive, undercover audit of our customer experience at our major hubs. I wanted to see exactly how our most loyal, premium-paying customers were treated when they didn't have VIP handlers escorting them. He stepped closer to the podium, leaning in slightly. The physical distance between them was minimal, but the power dynamic had shifted so violently that Brenda felt as though a skyscraper had just collapsed on top of her. I was told we had a systemic problem with gate agents abusing their authority, violating company policy, and alienating passengers, Onyx continued, his words precise and devastating. I wanted to believe the reports were exaggerated. I wanted to believe that the people wearing the Meridian uniform still possessed basic human decency and professional integrity. He looked at the scanner where Brenda had violently slammed her hand down just minutes prior. Instead, Onyx said, turning his gaze back to her trembling form, I found a gate agent who ignores valid ticketing protocols, invents fake security policies on the spot, racially profiles her passengers, and then lies to law enforcement when called out on her behavior. Mr. Echo, sir, I can explain, Brenda whispered, a cold sweat breaking out across her forehead. Her hands were shaking so violently she had to grip the edges of the podium to stay upright. I was just following security protocols. You didn't look like... She stopped, realizing the horrific trap she was walking herself into. I didn't look like what, Brenda? Onyx asked, his voice deathly quiet. I didn't look like someone who could afford first class? I didn't look like someone who deserved basic respect? Or did I just not look like someone who could hold you accountable? Officer Miller, sensing the absolute destruction of the gate agent's career happening in real time, took a respectful step back, crossing his arms. The passengers behind Onyx, who had been listening in stunned silence, began to murmur excitedly. Clara Higgins let out a sharp, vindicated laugh. Officer Miller, Onyx said, turning slightly to the policeman. Did this agent state on the radio that I was aggressive, hostile, and causing a disturbance? Yes, sir, she did, Officer Miller confirmed without hesitation. Dispatch recorded the call. She also stated you were attempting to use fraudulent documents to breach the boarding area. Filing a false report to law enforcement to cover up a civil rights violation at a federal airport, Onyx stated, looking back at Brenda. That is not just a fireable offense, Brenda. That is a criminal one. Brenda's knees buckled slightly. Please, Mr. Echo, I have 15 years with this company. I have a pension. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. The mistake, Onyx said, picking his black CEO card up from the counter and sliding it back into his wallet, was assuming your uniform gave you the right to strip people of their dignity. Onyx reached into his duffel bag and pulled out a separate radio, one tuned directly to the Atlanta hub manager's frequency. He pressed the button. This is Onyx Echo. I need the Atlanta station manager, David Mitchell, and the head of airport HR at Gate B12 immediately. Bring a replacement gate agent. We have a flight to board and an immediate termination to process. The agonizing wait for the station manager felt like an eternity for Brenda, though in reality it was less than 4 minutes. During that time, the atmosphere at Gate B12 transformed from one of frustration to rapt, stunned fascination. The 70-odd passengers waiting to board Flight 402 watched in total silence, the sheer magnitude of the karma unfolding before them, keeping them entirely transfixed. Onyx Echo did not gloat. He did not yell. He stood perfectly still, his posture radiating the quiet, terrifying authority of a man who held thousands of careers in his hands. He checked his watch, a simple, unassuming piece, waiting for his command to be answered. Officer Miller, the airport police officer Brenda had weaponized against Onyx, now stood alongside his partner, boxing Brenda in. They weren't arresting her yet, but their positioning made it abundantly clear that she was no longer the authority figure here. She was the suspect. "Mr. Echo, please," Brenda whispered again, tears finally spilling over her heavily mascaraed eyelashes, leaving dark streaks down her pale cheeks. The false bravado was entirely gone, replaced by the naked terror of a woman watching her comfortable, pension-secured life evaporate in real time. "I have 2 kids in college. I've given my life to Meridian. You can't just fire me over one misunderstanding." Onyx slowly turned his head to look at her. There was no pity in his eyes, only a profound, uncompromising standard. "This wasn't a misunderstanding, Brenda," Onyx said, his voice carrying clearly over the hum of the terminal. "A misunderstanding is scanning a ticket twice. A misunderstanding is giving someone the wrong seat assignment. What you did was a calculated abuse of power. You weaponized law enforcement against a passenger because of your own personal prejudice. And when confronted with proof that you were wrong, you chose to lie to a police officer. You didn't just fail at customer service, you failed at basic human decency. And the fact that you think 15 years of employment entitles you to treat people like garbage tells me exactly why this airline's reputation is failing." Before Brenda could formulate another pathetic defense, the heavy double doors at the end of the concourse banged open. 3 figures came practically sprinting down the terminal. Leading the pack was David Mitchell, the Atlanta hub station manager, his face flushed, his tie flapping over his shoulder. Right behind him was Sarah Jenkins from Airport Human Resources, clutching a clipboard, and a younger, terrified-looking gate agent pulled from a nearby desk. David arrived at the podium panting, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. The police, the crying gate agent, and the tall man in the faded Yale sweatshirt. David had never met Onyx Echo in person, but he had attended the emergency virtual town hall 2 weeks ago when the board announced the new CEO. He recognized the face immediately. "Mr. Echo, sir," David gasped, coming to a screeching halt and practically bowing. "David Mitchell, station manager. I am so terribly sorry, sir. We had no idea you were flying through our hub today." "That was the point, David," Onyx replied, shaking his hand firmly. "I am conducting an unannounced quality assurance audit, and unfortunately, Gate B12 has failed catastrophically." David turned his gaze toward Brenda, his expression hardening into pure, unadulterated fury. He didn't need the full story to know that Brenda had just nuked her career and potentially put his own job in jeopardy. "Brenda, what on earth have you done?" David hissed. "Mr. Mitchell, I didn't know," she sobbed, grasping at her manager's sleeve. "He was wearing sweatpants. I thought he was trying to sneak into first class. I just asked for his credit card to verify." She asked for a credit card, physically blocked the scanner, refused to look at my digital boarding pass, dismissed my physical ID, and then called APD, claiming I was hostile, aggressive, and carrying fraudulent documents, Onyx stated clinically, delivering the facts like a prosecutor in a courtroom. David closed his eyes for a brief second, visibly wincing at each violation. He turned back to his CEO. "Mr. Echo, I assure you, this is not indicative of how we train our staff. I will handle this immediately." Onyx nodded. "See that you do. I want her off this concourse, now." David turned to the HR representative. "Sarah, process the paperwork. Immediate termination with cause, gross misconduct, violating anti-discrimination policies, and filing a false security report." "Wait, you can't!" Brenda wailed, the reality finally shattering her denial. "The union. I demand my union representative." "You can call your rep from home, Brenda," Sarah Jenkins said coldly, stepping forward. "But gross misconduct clauses override standard grievance procedures. Hand over your security badge. Now." The ultimate humiliation had arrived. Brenda's hands shook so violently she could barely reach up to unclip the laminated security badge from her lapel. That badge was her pass to the kingdom. It was what gave her power over the thousands of people who shuffled past her desk every day. Sarah reached out and snapped the badge off Brenda's jacket herself. "Officer Miller," Onyx said, turning back to the policeman. "You were called here for a disruptive individual causing a disturbance. I believe you have found her. Will you be pursuing charges for the false report?" Officer Miller, clearly disgusted that he had been used as an instrument of Brenda's prejudice, nodded firmly. "Yes, sir. Filing a false police report at an international airport is a severe offense. It ties up vital security resources. Miss Lawson, you are coming with us to the precinct office for processing." Brenda let out a choked, guttural sob. The crowd, which had been silent, suddenly erupted into applause. It started with Clara Higgins, the older woman who had defended Onyx, and quickly spread through the entire waiting area. People clapped, cheered, and some even whistled as Officer Miller gently but firmly took Brenda by the elbow and guided her away from the podium. She was escorted out, crying hysterically, paraded past the exact same passengers she had treated with such profound contempt just 10 minutes prior. With Brenda removed, the atmosphere at Gate B12 completely reset. The young replacement gate agent, a nervous man named Toby, quickly logged into the terminal, his hands shaking as he pulled up the flight manifest. Onyx turned to face the waiting passengers. He raised his hand slightly, and the applause quickly died down. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Onyx Echo. I am the new Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Airways," he announced, his voice projecting warmth and genuine contrition. "I want to personally apologize to each and every one of you for the unacceptable behavior you just witnessed, and for the delay to your flight tonight. When I took this job 2 weeks ago, I promised our board that I would fix this airline from the ground up. Tonight, you saw exactly why that is necessary. We are going to get you boarded immediately, and as a token of my apology, I am authorizing our station manager to issue a $500 travel voucher to every single passenger on this flight." The crowd cheered again, this time with genuine elation. Onyx turned to Toby. "Ready to board, son?" Yes, Mr. Echo. Group 1 and first class. Right this way," Toby stammered, holding the scanner out. Onyx didn't board immediately. Instead, he walked over to the Group 2 lane, approaching Clara Higgins and her husband. Clara looked at him with wide eyes. "Ma'am," Onyx said gently, extending his hand, "I wanted to thank you. You didn't know who I was, but you saw something wrong, and you spoke up. That takes courage." Clara shook his hand, blushing furiously. "Well, it was just plain wrong, Mr. Echo. Nobody should be treated like that, especially not by someone in a uniform." "I agree," Onyx smiled. "Toby, do we have 2 open seats in the first-class cabin?" Toby furiously typed on his keyboard. "Yes, sir. Seats 3A and 3B are open due to misconnections. Excellent, Onyx said. Please upgrade Mr. and Mrs. Higgins immediately. On the house. Clara gasped, clapping her hands to her mouth while her husband beamed. Oh my goodness, thank you. We've never flown first class in our lives. Enjoy the flight, Ma'am, Onyx said. He finally walked over to the scanner, tapped his digital pass, and walked down the jet bridge. The interior of the Boeing 777 was a stark contrast to the chaotic terminal. The first-class cabin was an oasis of calm, with soft, ambient purple lighting and the smell of fresh coffee. As Onyx stepped onto the plane, the lead flight attendant, a seasoned professional named Rebecca, was waiting for him. She had clearly been radioed by David Mitchell about what had just transpired. Welcome aboard, Mr. Echo, Rebecca said, offering a respectful nod. We are honored to have you flying with us today. Can I take your coat or your bag? Just the bag is fine, Rebecca, thank you, Onyx said, his demeanor returning to that of a weary traveler. The adrenaline of the confrontation was fading, leaving behind the exhaustion of a long week. He settled into seat 2A, a spacious, private pod near the window. As the rest of the passengers boarded, including a very thrilled Clara and her husband, who settled in just behind him, Onyx pulled out a sleek silver laptop from his briefcase. He connected to the onboard Wi-Fi. He wasn't going to wait until Monday to address what had happened. While the plane taxied toward the runway, banking sharply against the dark, rainy Atlanta sky, Onyx began typing an urgent, company-wide memorandum. Subject: immediate policy overhaul, zero tolerance for discrimination and abuse of authority. To all Meridian Airways staff, tonight at our Atlanta hub, I personally witnessed a catastrophic failure of our core values. I was subjected to racial profiling, policy manipulation, and verbal hostility by one of our gate agents, who then proceeded to file a false report with airport police when confronted. This individual has been terminated and is currently facing criminal charges. Let me be incredibly clear. The uniform you wear is a symbol of service, not a shield for prejudice or petty tyranny. As Onyx typed, the heavy thrust of the jet engines pushed him back into his seat. The plane lifted off the tarmac, soaring into the stormy night, leaving the chaos of the airport far below. Miles away, in a stark, cinder-block interrogation room within the airport police precinct, Brenda Lawson sat handcuffed to a metal bench. Her Meridian Airways scarf was tangled, her makeup was ruined, and her phone had been confiscated. The detective sitting across from her, a tough, no-nonsense woman named Detective Vance, dropped a thick file onto the metal table. Well, Miss Lawson, the detective said coldly, we have the dispatch audio. We have the statements from 70 passengers. We have the statement from your station manager. And we have the statement from the CEO of your former airline. You are being officially charged with filing a false police report, misuse of emergency services, and creating a public disturbance. Because this occurred in a secure federal transportation sector, the district attorney is looking at pursuing maximum penalties. Brenda buried her face in her hands, her wails echoing off the concrete walls. The crushing weight of reality had fully set in. She had lost her job, her pension, her reputation, and quite possibly her freedom. And she had lost it all not because of a bad day or a mistake, but because she had allowed the dark, ugly core of her own prejudice to guide her actions, thinking she was untouchable. She had picked the wrong man. She had picked the absolute wrong time. And the universe had delivered its verdict with merciless precision. When Flight 402 finally touched down at London Heathrow, the heavy Georgia thunderstorms had been replaced by a crisp, overcast English morning. Onyx Echo remained in Seat 2, along after the seatbelt sign was turned off, allowing the rest of the first-class cabin to deplane. Clara Higgins and her husband waved a cheerful, profoundly grateful goodbye as they disembarked, still visibly buzzing from the unexpected luxury of their transatlantic journey. Onyx packed his silver laptop back into his worn duffel bag. The quiet solitude of the flight had allowed him to draft a comprehensive, draconian restructuring plan for Meridian Airways ground operations. He had anticipated resistance from the old guard corporate executives, but the events at Gate B12 had just provided him with the ultimate, undeniable ammunition. As he stepped off the plane and was greeted by a VIP tarmac transfer, a stark contrast to his undercover boarding experience, his phone reconnected to the cellular network. Instantly, the device erupted. A cacophony of notifications, missed calls, and urgent text messages flooded the screen. Onyx glanced at the names. Penelope Hayes, his global head of public relations, Richard Belmont, the chairman of the board, and David Mitchell from Atlanta. Onyx tapped Penelope's name. She answered on the first ring. "Onyx, thank God!" Penelope's voice was breathless, entirely stripped of its usual polished, PR-approved calm. "Are you off the plane? Have you seen the internet?" "I just landed, Penelope," Onyx replied smoothly, sliding into the back of the waiting black Bentley. "I assume you are referring to the incident at Hartsfield-Jackson." "Incident?" Penelope let out a sharp, anxious laugh. "Onyx, it's a global phenomenon. A passenger in the boarding area, a young guy named Thomas Weaver, recorded the entire altercation on his phone. The moment that gate agent slammed her hand on the scanner, right up to the point where the police escorted her away in handcuffs. He posted it online before your plane even took off. It hit the front page of every major aggregator by midnight." Onyx leaned back against the leather seat, watching the London tarmac roll by. "And the metrics?" "Over 40 million views across all platforms in 8 hours," Penelope recited, the sheer volume making her voice shake. "The hashtag Meridian Meltdown is trending #1 worldwide. But here is the crazy part, Onyx. Usually, when a video like this drops, our stock tanks in the pre-market, and I have to draft a groveling apology. But the narrative is entirely focused on you." "Explain," Onyx commanded. "The internet is treating you like a corporate superhero," she said, sounding utterly bewildered. "Because the video shows you maintaining total composure, revealing your identity, and firing her on the spot, the public reaction is overwhelmingly positive toward your leadership. They are tearing the gate agent apart, but they are praising Meridian Airways for finally holding its toxic employees accountable. Financial news networks are running segments, calling it the most decisive CEO action of the decade." Onyx felt a cold, strategic satisfaction settle over him. He had not wanted the incident publicized, but now that it was the perfect catalyst. "Penelope, listen to me very carefully," Onyx instructed. "Do not issue a standard corporate apology. Do not use the words isolated incident. I sent a company-wide memo during the flight outlining a zero-tolerance policy. I want you to release that exact memo to the press, unedited. Let the public see exactly how we are handling this internally." "Release an internal memo? Onyx, the legal department will have an absolute fit. It admits liability. I am the chief executive officer, Penelope." "Not the legal department," Onyx interrupted, his voice hardening into steel. "We are not hiding behind corporate speak. We are leaning into this. We own the failure, and we showcase the immediate correction. Have the memo sent to every major news outlet in 10 minutes. Then, set up an emergency virtual meeting with the board of directors for noon London time." "Yes, sir." Penelope swallowed hard. "It's done." 4 hours later, Onyx sat at the head of a massive mahogany table in Meridian's sleek, glass-walled London headquarters, looking at a grid of faces on a massive, high-definition monitor. The board of directors, a collection of wealthy, older men and women who had watched the airline's reputation slowly rot over the past decade, looked back at him, clearly rattled. Richard Belmont, a billionaire investor with a notoriously short temper, cleared his throat. Onyx, this situation in Atlanta. While the PR spin seems to be working in our favor for the moment, firing a veteran employee so publicly, without a union hearing, opens us up to massive, wrongful termination lawsuits. Onyx didn't blink. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, steepling his fingers. Richard, that woman filed a false police report against me because I am black, wearing a sweatshirt, and had the audacity to stand in the first-class line, Onyx said, his voice deadly quiet, echoing through the boardroom speakers in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. She fabricated a security threat. She lied to law enforcement. If I had been an ordinary passenger without the title of CEO to protect me, I would have spent the night in a holding cell, missed my flight, and had my name added to a federal watch list, all because of a gate agent's unchecked, malignant prejudice. The board members fell silent. This airline has spent the last 10 years protecting bad actors in the name of union peace and avoiding lawsuits, Onyx continued, his eyes scanning the digital faces. That ends today. I am initiating a complete purge of our ground operations management. Any station manager whose hub falls below a 90% customer satisfaction rating over the next 2 quarters will be replaced. We are implementing mandatory, intensive de-escalation and anti-bias training for every single employee who interacts with the public, and we are raising the starting salary of our gate agents by 20% to attract better talent. 20%? A board member from Chicago gasped. Onyx, the cost projections. The cost of doing nothing is bankruptcy, Onyx snapped back. Look at the stock ticker, gentlemen. We are up 4% this morning because the market finally believes we have a spine. Do not make me regret taking this job. There was no further argument. The board, cowed by the sheer force of Onyx's conviction and the undeniable reality of the viral video, unanimously approved his emergency restructuring plan. Meanwhile, back in Atlanta, the full weight of the viral firestorm was crashing down on Brenda Lawson. She had been released on bail early Saturday morning, her eyes bloodshot, her spirit entirely broken. She had expected a quiet, shameful retreat to her suburban home. Instead, she found 3 news vans parked on her lawn. Her neighbors were standing on their porches, glaring at her. Her phone, which had been returned to her by the police, was practically melting from the influx of notifications. The video was everywhere. She couldn't open a single app without seeing her own face contorted in an ugly, prejudiced sneer, followed by the terrifying moment she realized who Onyx was. The internet, entirely devoid of mercy, had tracked down her digital footprint. They found her old, thinly veiled discriminatory posts on Facebook. They found complaints from other passengers who had suffered under her petty tyranny over the years, suddenly realizing that the Atlanta gate tyrant had finally been caught. Brenda locked herself in her bathroom, sinking to the cold tile floor, weeping uncontrollably. She called her union representative, a man named Gary, hoping for a lifeline. "Gary, you have to help me," Brenda sobbed into the phone. "They terminated me without a hearing. You have to file a grievance." Gary sighed heavily, the sound of a man who knew a lost cause when he saw one. "Brenda, I've seen the video. Everyone has seen the video. The union protects workers from unfair corporate practices. It does not protect workers from committing crimes on camera. You filed a false police report against the CEO. The company's lawyers sent over the termination packet this morning. It's ironclad." "But my pension," she cried. "I've been there 15 years. "Read your contract, Brenda," Gary said quietly. "Termination for gross misconduct and criminal activity voids the severance package and penalizes the pension payout. I strongly suggest you hire a criminal defense attorney. The DA is making an example out of you." The phone clicked dead. Brenda sat alone on the floor, the walls of her comfortable life rapidly closing in, the true, agonizing sting of karma finally wrapping its hands around her throat. 6 months later, the chaotic, stormy night at Gate B12 felt like a distant memory for Meridian Airways. Under Onyx Echo's ruthless, visionary leadership, the airline had undergone a miraculous transformation. The toxic culture had been systematically eradicated. Customer satisfaction scores were at a 10-year high. The stock price had stabilized, and the public viewed the brand with a renewed sense of trust. But for Brenda Lawson, the nightmare was just reaching its crescendo. The Fulton County Courthouse in downtown Atlanta was a cold, imposing structure of granite and glass. Inside courtroom 4B, the air was stale and tense. Brenda sat at the defense table, looking significantly older than she had 6 months prior. The designer clothes and manicured nails were gone, replaced by an ill-fitting, conservative grey suit. The stress of being a global pariah had taken a heavy physical toll. Her shoulders were slumped, and her eyes darted nervously around the room. The gallery behind her was packed. While the national media had moved on to other outrage cycles, local news outlets and a handful of aviation bloggers were present to witness the final chapter of the viral saga. Sitting quietly in the back row, dressed in a sharp, understated navy suit, was Onyx Echo. He hadn't come to gloat. He had come to ensure the loop was closed. The presiding judge, the Honorable Margaret Harrison, a woman known for her strict, uncompromising demeanor, tapped her gavel against the wooden sounding block, bringing the room to order. Case number 24-CR-8802. The State of Georgia versus Brenda Lawson, Judge Harrison announced, her sharp eyes peering over her reading glasses at the defendant. "Ms. Lawson, you have entered a plea of guilty to 1 count of filing a false police report and 1 count of creating a public disturbance. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Brenda whispered, her voice barely carrying past the microphone. "Speak up, Ms. Lawson," the judge reprimanded. "Yes, Your Honor," Brenda repeated, louder, her voice cracking. Judge Harrison folded her hands, looking down at the pre-sentencing report. "I have reviewed the facts of this case extensively. I have watched the video footage that the entire world has seen. I have read the victim impact statements, not just from Mr. Echo, but from 3 other passengers who came forward during the investigation to detail similar experiences of discrimination and harassment at your hands." Brenda closed her eyes, a tear escaping and trailing down her cheek. "Your defense attorney," Judge Harrison continued, gesturing toward the exhausted-looking public defender beside Brenda, "has asked for leniency. He points out your 15 years of employment, your lack of prior criminal history, and the intense public shaming you have already endured as a form of punishment." The judge leaned forward, the atmosphere in the courtroom growing incredibly heavy. "However, Ms. Lawson, I do not view your public shaming as punishment. I view it as a consequence of your own arrogance," Judge Harrison stated, her voice slicing through the silence like a scalpel. "You were entrusted with a position of authority in a secure federal transportation hub. You abused that authority in the most vile, prejudiced manner imaginable. You looked at a man, made a racist assumption based on his clothing and his skin color, and when he politely proved you wrong, you attempted to use the police as a weapon to destroy his life." The judge paused, letting the weight of the words settle over the courtroom. If that man hadn't been the CEO of the airline, if he had just been an ordinary citizen, Your lies could have resulted in his violent arrest, his imprisonment, and a permanent stain on his record, Judge Harrison said fiercely. You didn't care about security. You cared about your own fragile ego. You wanted to put him in his place. Well, Ms. Lawson, today the court is going to put you in yours. Brenda gasped, her hands shaking violently as she gripped the edge of the defense table. Please stand for sentencing, the judge ordered. Brenda practically had to be hauled to her feet by her attorney. Brenda Lawson, on the charge of filing a false police report. I sentence you to 3 years of probation, the first 6 months of which will be served under strict house arrest with electronic monitoring, Judge Harrison declared, her voice ringing with absolute finality. Furthermore, you are ordered to complete 1,000 hours of community service, specifically assigned to organizations that aid marginalized communities. You are also ordered to pay a fine of $15,000 to the court, and you are permanently banned from seeking employment in any secure transportation sector within the United States. Court is adjourned. The gavel slammed down. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Brenda collapsed back into her chair, sobbing openly into her hands. The reality of her future, a ruined reputation, heavy debt, and a permanent criminal record, was absolute. She had lost everything because she couldn't treat a human being with basic decency. As the bailiffs moved in to process Brenda for her ankle monitor, Onyx Echo quietly stood up from his seat in the back row. He didn't say a word to the press outside. He didn't issue a statement. He simply walked out of the courthouse, stepped into the warm Atlanta afternoon, and headed back to the airport. 2 hours later, Onyx stood at the front of a massive, brightly lit conference room at the Meridian Airways Training Center near the airport. Seated before him were 60 young, eager faces, the newest graduating class of Meridian gate agents and customer service representatives. They looked at him with a mixture of awe and healthy respect. They all knew the story. It was the foundation of their new training curriculum. Onyx walked slowly across the front of the room, looking into the eyes of the future of his company. You are the face of Meridian Airways, Onyx began, his voice calm, powerful, and deeply sincere. When a passenger walks through those doors, exhausted, stressed, and far from home, you are the first impression they get of who we are. The uniform you are about to put on is not a badge of superiority. It is a promise of service. He stopped, resting his hand on the podium. Months ago, someone in your position forgot that promise, Onyx said quietly. She looked at a passenger and saw only her own bias. She chose cruelty over compassion. She chose ego over integrity. And it cost her everything. He let the silence hang in the air, ensuring the lesson was carved into their memories. Never forget that every person standing on the other side of your desk has a story, a family, and a fundamental right to be treated with dignity, regardless of what they wear, how they look, or what class of ticket they hold, Onyx said, a warm smile finally breaking across his face. If you protect their dignity, I promise you, this company will protect you. Welcome to Meridian Airways. Now let's go change the way the world flies. The room erupted into applause, genuine and thunderous. Onyx looked out at the clapping trainees, knowing that the agonizing incident at Gate B12 had not broken the airline. It had forged it into something vastly superior. The storm had passed, and the skies ahead were finally clear. If you loved this story of brutal karma and ultimate justice, hit that like button right now. It costs you nothing and helps push this story to more people who need to hear it. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and family. Everyone loves seeing a toxic bully get exactly what they deserve. What did you think of the CEO's undercover tactic? Have you ever witnessed something like this at an airport? Drop a comment down below with your thoughts. I read every single one. Finally, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on our daily dramatic stories, revenge tales, and real-life karma moments. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.